up, dearies? Remember me, Menopause Barbie here, helping you make the rest of your life the best of your life. And it's best if you never get Alzheimer's. Obviously, we're pursuing an entire unit on Alzheimer's, but we haven't even gotten to the actual disease yet. And that's because in order to actually understand Alzheimer's, you have to understand some basic things about how your brain works. Now, I am no neuroscientist. I'm a gynecologist. And that's actually a good thing because my way of teaching you how your brain works is a lot more simplistic than a neuroscientist's way. So far, I've taught you about the basic building block of your brain, the neuron, which was video 236, the white matter that surrounds the neurons and speeds up information transfer, which was video 237, and the material with which you build your brain and how it determines whether it stays built up or breaks down, which was video 238. Well, this is video 239, and it's the fourth video in the unit on Alzheimer's, and it's on brain anatomy. Don't worry, it will be nothing like you expect in a typical anatomy lesson. I'm actually going to tell you more about how your brain is not designed than about how it is designed. And believe it or not, I will only make two broad distinctions about the regions of your brain. Talk about simplifying a complex structure. But as I told you in video 238 on how your brain builds up and breaks down, my focus is on aging and Alzheimer's, and they are not one and the same. But the anatomical aspects of your brain that you need to consider in understanding them is. So I will simply divide your brain into front and back and right and left. Chapter 33 is the Alzheimer's chapter in my book, but you will greatly enhance what you find in the book by watching this video. See these brain models? That's only half a brain, but here's a whole brain model. Notice all the different patches of colors on them. I find these bothersome. And the reason I find them bothersome is that while the colors demarcate different regions of the brain, they also tend to imply that different regions have distinctly different functions. They remind me of a patchwork quilt. Do you remember the patchwork quilts our grandmothers used to make? And you might still have one, or you may have become the grandmother who makes one. In any case, you create a patchwork quilt from scratch. From scratch. I've always thought that was an odd expression. From scratch implies creating something from basic ingredients without using something that is already prepared. I think people use it mostly to refer to cooking, but it also captures how one makes a patchwork quilt. A patchwork quilt consists of little pieces of material that originated from all sorts of other garments. They're scraps. Some are really old scraps. Others are relatively new scraps. Some are subtle. Some are robust. But a patchwork quilt connects them all. Some scraps show up again and again, while others only once or twice. And they're all scattered all over the quilt. Now, why in the world am I talking about a patchwork quilt? Well, it's because your brain is both like and unlike a patchwork quilt in various ways. It's unlike a patchwork quilt in that each function of your brain does not occur in just one little area of your brain. Think about it. Your brain is the most complex organ in your body. There is no way each process or function is isolated to just one part of your brain. Remember video 238 on brain buildup? I showed you how the connections between neurons determine how dense and smart your brain is. The more far-reaching those connections, the smarter you are. You even learned that it's possible to connect the neurons in opposite hemispheres. So the last thing you want is a brain that limits functions to just one region. So unlike the patchwork quilt, the regions of your brain are not completely independent of one another. The more they all work together, the better. But on the contrary, there are aspects of your brain function that are like a patchwork quilt. In the quilt, there are all sorts of patches, some old, some new. And they originate from all sorts of different outfits, some of which were old, and some of which were scraps of garments Grandma made anew. And yet, they all connected. They all contributed to the same quilt. Well, your brain is like that. You have all sorts of regions, types of memory, skills, and experiences. And they all interact to form just one brain. So be sure to understand that the colored sections on this brain represents regions of the brain in terms of their anatomical location, but not in terms of their function. And while certain structures in your brain have specific functions, none of them works completely alone. Instead, they are all dependent on one another. Now, some parts of your brain are more primitive than others, and other parts of your brain are more mature than others. The words primitive and mature mean just what they imply. Primitive brain functions are the very basic kinds of thinking and knowledge. Mature brain functions are the more advanced kinds of thinking and knowledge. We're all born with the capacity to achieve most of the primitive functions, but not the mature ones. The mature ones are a result of your hard work. They're the ones that result from education and doing all the things that build up your brain that I taught you in video 238. One of the most important distinctions in the parts of your brain for purposes of our unit on Alzheimer's is the distinction between the front of your brain and the back of your brain. This is because the front of your brain has special powers that the back of your brain does not have. In order to explain this, let's first address two different kinds of knowledge. The two kinds of knowledge of importance are descriptive knowledge and prescriptive knowledge. I just love it when two contrasting things have a ring to them. Descriptive and prescriptive. Descriptive knowledge refers to how things are in reality. These are the things that have nothing to do with you. They are what they are. They are facts. There's nothing you can do about them. Prescriptive knowledge refers to how you want things to be. They are the things that do have to do with you. They are the things over which you have control. You can do something to manipulate them. So descriptive knowledge is what you know, and prescriptive knowledge is what you do. This menopause education is a perfect example of these two types of knowledge. The facts I teach you are descriptive. What you choose to do with them are prescriptive. They're not my prescriptions. They're yours. You learn the facts, which you cannot change. That's descriptive knowledge. But you also learn all the options for managing the facts, and that's the part you can change. So that's prescriptive knowledge. Well, how does this have anything to do with your brain anatomy? Well, it's simple, really. It's the difference between the front of your brain and the back of your brain. The back of your brain is responsible for descriptive knowledge, while the front of your brain is responsible for prescriptive knowledge. The back of your brain knows how things are. The front of your brain knows what to do about the way things are. The front of your brain is the part that makes you able to solve problems in a way that works best for you. So you can think of the back of your brain as being more primitive than the front of your brain. And that's because the front of your brain is the conductor or the CEO of your brain. Just as the conductor of an orchestra puts all the instruments together, and just as the CEO of a company oversees the entire organization, the front of your brain is in charge of your brain's overall function. And the bigger and denser the front of your brain, the smarter you are. That's the most important tidbit about brain anatomy for purposes of understanding Alzheimer's. But there's a second critical distinction about the overall anatomy of your brain. It's the difference between the right and left sides of your brain. In video 238, I mentioned that there are many misconceptions about the roles of these two sides of your brain. And now I'm going to further clarify that and teach you how these two sides of your brain work. Think about how many things you learn and remember over the course of your lifetime. You have a whole library of knowledge and experience in your head. But everything you learn has two phases. The first phase is when you encounter a situation, problem, or piece of information the very first time. That's when it's new, or news, if you will. Think about it. When you are faced with new information, your brain has to work hard to make sense of it before you can use it. You may have encountered this very phenomenon with the discovery of this education you're getting here at Menopause University. When you realized that I delivered new information that you had never learned before, you had to ponder it at first. It did not fit with what you had previously thought. In most cases, women know absolutely nothing about menopause. Well, it is the job of the right side of your brain to process new information. Anytime you expose yourself to learning something new, it is the right side of your brain that you are using when you first learn new things. And you can feel your brain working when it's learning something new. It's almost as if you feel like pieces of a puzzle are fitting together, or as if you are connecting dots. Some people describe it as a feeling of a light bulb turning on. But after you've learned something, and it's not new anymore, you just store that knowledge in your library of information. The next time you need to use it, it's just a matter of retrieving what's now old information. When you retrieve old information, there's no light bulb because you've already processed the information back when it was new. All you have to do to use old information is retrieve it. And it is the left side of your brain that houses all the old information. So once new information is not new anymore, it gets shifted to the left side of your brain. Realize that this brain, I'm holding it as if it's in my head, so I know that the right and left sides of the screen are different from what I'm pointing to. But this is the left side of this brain because that is the back of the brain. just in case you wondered. So new information is always becoming old information in your brain. And if you continue to accumulate new information, you use both sides of your brain. And the more systematically you add new information to your right hemisphere and then shift it as old information to your left hemisphere, the better, bigger, and smarter your brain. But if you never learn anything systematically enough to connect the dots, none of that new information ever gets stored as old information. Instead, you're left with confusion in the left side of your brain. This is why I implore you to watch my videos in order. If you do this sequence of learning new information and then turning it into old information becomes automatic. If you think about this, it means that the more you learn, the more you utilize the right side of your brain to process information, and the more you use the left side of your brain to store information. So, the right side of your brain is for new information, and the left side of your brain is for old information. So let's imagine some scenarios. What if you stop learning new information? You always seek the familiar, and you shun anything that doesn't fit with what you already know. Well, in this instance, you stop using the right side of your brain. Ages ago, I presented video number 105. It was entitled News versus Olds. We weren't talking about the brain back then. I was just addressing a common behavior of most humans. Most people really just want to stick with the familiar. They do not want the challenge of learning new things. So in this scenario, your brain basically stagnates. You use only the left side that contains the knowledge you have already. You add nothing new to the right side. So the right side of your brain remains idle, and you use only what is in the left side of your brain. A second scenario could be a situation in which you are always learning new things. In this case, you constantly seek the unfamiliar, and you love things that challenge what you already know. In this instance, you constantly continue using the right side of your brain. And as you learn new things, you constantly shift them to the left side of your brain when they aren't new anymore. And the left side of your brain becomes a huge repository of information that forms the basis of what you already know. But it's constantly changing too. Which scenario would you prefer? Well, in this unit on Alzheimer's, you will learn a lot about the effect of new knowledge on your brain as you age and on your risk for Alzheimer's disease. So what you'll see in later videos about Alzheimer's is that the distinction between the front and back of your brain and the distinction between the right and left of your brain determine the risk of Alzheimer's and your symptoms of Alzheimer's if you get it. Back in video 237 entitled It's All a Matter of Gray and White, I told you to remember two distinctions. Do you remember what they were? Oh, come on. They're the two things I talked about today. They were storage versus retrieval and new versus old. And now you see why they were important things to remember. Okay, I know that this was not really an anatomy lesson. Do you realize I never even mentioned a single brain structure? But I can assure you that it's adequate for our purposes. Just know that while the actual parts of your brain may be labeled like a patchwork quilt, the labels do not dictate function. When it comes to anatomical function, the important distinctions are between the primitive back of your brain, which only has descriptive knowledge and knows how things are, versus the mature front of your brain, which has prescriptive knowledge and knows what to do about the way things are, and between the right side of your brain, which processes new information, versus the left side of your brain, which stores old information. And that's the easiest brain anatomy lesson you'll ever encounter. This is where we'll stop today. Join me in a week when I'll teach you about the different kinds of learning and memory. Don't forget. And don't forget to go to menopausetailored.me, where you can schedule a consultation or see all my resources, read articles, or anything you want. Don't forget to subscribe, and don't forget to follow me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Bye.